Good afternoon and welcome to our Star Reader Chat today. I'm one of our hosts, Dave Fitzsimmons, cartoonist, columnist, and ne'er-do-well for the Arizona Daily Star. And today we're going to be talking about, this is an earful. I've got to read this. The Citizens Commission on Public Service and Compensations final report and recommendation for Proposition 410. And our guest today is spokeswoman and member of that commission, Laura Dent, who's here to talk about the proposition and also to take any questions those of you who are visiting with us may have. So please feel free to ask any questions. You can place your questions in the chat by checking below. There's a black menu bar. You'll have participants, find the button chat, click on that, and you can place your question there. Or if you wish, you can digitally raise your hand up in the right-hand corner of your Zoom box. There'll be a field, click on that, and you will find raise your hand. And we will attempt to get to you so we can hear your questions. Before we begin, I just want to say that Jill Jordan Spitz, our editor, and Sarah Gasson, our opinion editor, unfortunately, both have scheduling conflicts, so they will be unable to attend this chat. But the editorial board has spoken with Ms. Laura Dent previously, and we will force them, we will ensure that they will indeed enjoy watching the video from today before making their final endorsement decision. So to get things started, the first question I have is, well, I guess I should, before I get to my question, we should let you describe what your recommendation is, but follow that up with how is this recommendation different from proposals in the past that have not been quite as successful?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Dave. It's good to see everyone on this call and folks tuning in. Sure. So Proposition 410 is going to appear before Tucson voters in November of this year in the city's municipal election. This recommendation is created by the mouthful, as described, the Citizens Commission on Public Service Compensation. And this group is convened every 2 years per the City of Tucson charter to make recommendations in relation to the salary and wages of mayor and council. So our recommendation, I'll share a little bit about that and some context around historic successes and not so successful endeavors. But our recommendation is to increase, there's 4 parts and 4 components. So I'll go through each of those individually. The first is to increase council member salary from the current salary, which is $24,000 a year. That's less than $12 an hour, less than Arizona's minimum wage. And we would increase that to $36,000. So that'd be a $12,000 increase in the council member's salary. The second component would be to increase the mayor's salary from the current $42,000 a year to $54,000 a year. Again, a $12,000 increase for the mayor of the city of Tucson. The third component of this proposal is to increase wages in future years based on the National Consumer Price Index. That's also known commonly as inflation. Currently, Arizona's minimum wage statute is linked to inflation. In 2016, Arizona voters approved our minimum wage ballot measure and proposal. And so every year, our minimum wage across the state goes up in relation to the National Consumer Price Index. So this is a trusted metric that Arizona voters have endorsed before, and we want to link that to mayor and council salaries moving forward. And the final component is that this proposal and wage increase would not go into effect until 2023. So essentially, the incoming council will receive this wage increase. So those are the 4 components. It's quite a bit, but we try to make it accessible in terms of creating the same dollar amount of increase of $12,000 for both the mayor and the council. I think what's a little bit unique about this proposal is our committee felt it very, very important for this to have some traction with the voters. It's actually been more than 20 years since the Tucson Mayor and Council had a wage increase. So 1999 was the last successful ballot measure to give them a wage increase. And it shows in the level of compensation. Obviously, this is not a living wage that folks could live on and also serve the community full time. And so we felt it very important to make that happen. And as such, really wanted to try and create a proposal that carved out a middle path, but also would support council members and folks that are in public service by increasing their salaries in a very measured fashion in a way that voters have endorsed already. So never has there been a proposal that tied mayor and council salaries to CPI or to inflation. And that's really to help us avoid these 20-year stretches of drought where there is no salary increase for mayor and council. Currently, it's just not enough for you to not have another job, and that either one distracts from the work of your leadership as a council member or as the mayor, or it really isolates and doesn't allow working people and folks from diverse backgrounds, from different economic and socioeconomic backgrounds to be able to step into leadership. And that's really, I think, something important for working folks across the board. We want to make sure that we have people from all different walks of life able to serve their community. So that's what makes this proposal a little bit unique. And that's the nuts and bolts of what we're putting forward in Proposition 410.
When you mentioned wage, livable wage, I'm curious if you were able to quantify the hourly labor in any sense of what a councilhuman or a mayor might engage in the course of their job. I assume it's more than a 40-hour week, but what did you come up with any numbers for hours?
You know what? We didn't. What we did do is tackle this Tucson urban legend out there that mayor and council works part-time. It's something that I have heard many times, just living and working in the community, and there's nowhere in the charter, there's nowhere, we asked the city attorney and the city clerk to really dig deep to try and identify where does this idea come from that people think that the leaders of the second largest city in the state of Arizona are working part-time to decide the future of our water policy. What does urban development look like? Making huge and significant decisions for our community. This is more than a full-time job. And so there is this idea out there that council works part-time, and we really want to emphasize and debunk that myth. In a past life, I myself worked for a member of the city council, and I know that this job is it can consume every moment of your day if you allow it, but it's certainly more than a full-time job. So we want to make sure that our elected leaders are compensated as such, but really more than the 7 people that this is going to impact directly, we want to make sure we're throwing the doors open to any other Tucsonan from whatever background that they may be to throw their hat in the ring and be able to serve the community.
I always enjoy playing devil's advocate because I hear from devil's advocates so often. So my question is simply, hey, Tucson is a low-paying town. Why on earth should low-paid citizens vote for this? And why should mayor and council be any different from the rest of us poverty-stricken schlubs?
Right. I mean, the first point I'll say is council does not even make the state mandated minimum wage. So there's really no one in the community that is working through kind of the system and on the books that makes as little as our council members make right now. So they're not even keeping par with the rest of the community right now, and we're falling behind. But I also just want to lift up the fact that our peer communities across the state are compensating their leaders to a much higher level. And I think this is less about thinking about why don't I have what these folks may or may not have, but really what do we want our community to look like? What kind of investments do we want to make in our community? The leaders in the city of Phoenix make double what our council makes. In Mesa, Chandler, they're making far more than what our council makes in the 60s and 70,000s. And so really, these are peer communities that are smaller than our own city. So we really, I think, need to look at what is on the plate of these elected officials and what are they deciding on behalf of the community, and how do we make sure that that compensation is commensurate with the type of thoughtful consideration that all of these decisions merit, and why shouldn't we invest in ourselves as a community?
I have sort of an inside baseball historical question. Looking at the list of the number of times these propositions have been put forward, and the majority of times it has failed. However, it's like it's striking. It was at 1999 that it passed. And I'm wondering, do you know, is there anything, what was going on in 99 that the citizens of Tucson said, yeah, let's give them a raise, as opposed to other years when Tucsonans rejected the idea?
You know what? That's a great question, Dave. I'm sure that folks are coming from all different perspectives when they think about why they may or may not have endorsed that. So I definitely would love to know what other folks think about what may have been special about that year, about that time in our community. But it wasn't a huge margin that this was victorious by. And we see the same challenge at the state legislature. Our legislators make the same amount as our members of council. And we have seen several members of the legislature step back for monetary reasons because they can't make it work without a second stream of income. And so this is not really a question of, left, right, how do we feel about a particular jurisdiction or issues that we care about. This is really a good governance. How do we create pathways to leadership and reflective democracy at every level? So something special about 1999, but it's something that we really need to do more around to educate voters so that we're not reacting to the idea of our elected officials getting a raise when there's challenges that we see all across our community, but just thinking about what kind of service do we want to create for our city.
Yeah. We have a question from Allison Hughes. Allison, please unmute yourself and ask away.
Thank you. Yeah. I'd like to ask what sort of other benefits they have. I remember Molly McCaslin was famous for just riding the bus to city council. She didn't want to take the city car. So I wondered if you could talk about the other benefits. Do they have an expense account where they go to lunch with people and they, we pay for their lunches? What are their other benefits?
Sure. Thank you, Allison, for that question. So council does either get a vehicular stipend or they have access to a city vehicle that they can use to attend city events, public events in the community that they're serving. They do have a pension, just as every public employee has, and hopefully that public employees will continue to have in the future so that we have stable income for families long into their livelihood. And so they are compensated like other city employees and receive those same benefits. They do have the extra access to a vehicle because they have to attend certain events. And those are kind of the weighty benefits on top of the modest salary that they receive.
I would just like to point out a pointless bit of trivia here that the desire of your commission, you're proposing that we raise council member salary from $24,000 a year to $36,000 a year, which is $10,000 a year less than the average American exotic dancer earns. Put that in your hat. We have a question. We have a question from Abrisa. Abrisa, can you unmute yourself and would you care to ask the question? There you are. Oh, we can't hear you, Abresa. Well, I will ask on Abresa's behalf. Her question is, how many other city employees get an automatic CPI?
That is a great question. None that we know of. We do see that the city has enacted a $15 minimum wage for all city employees. And so council currently does not rise to the floor that they themselves have set for the broader workforce within the city. So we're kind of comparing a pretty dynamic situations where folks are coming in at a little bit of a higher level. They're not getting raises connected to CPI. That really is intended to build in some structural equity so that we see the floor continue to rise as costs in the community continue to rise. That's not something that other city employees benefit from. And, on the flip side, that's also not something other city employees have to deal with in terms of making such a modest level of compensation, particularly when it comes to the council members that serve the wards across.
Thank you for that answer. What are the chief objections you hear out and about when good souls discover your position, who you are, and what you've done and what you propose? What are the objections you typically hear?
Yeah, I mean, before moving into the objections, I do just want to celebrate the fact that we have folks across the political spectrum that are very supportive, from like the Arizona lists and the Adelitas of the world that focus on getting women and women of color engaged in the public sector, to the Tucson Chamber, young professionals. There's really quite a breadth of support for this proposal, which I think is not something that we see often. That speaks to the merits of the effort. But on the flip side, I think a lot of the challenge relates to how folks are doing individually. Obviously, we continue to suffer through a global pandemic. Folks are struggling economically. Housing costs are rising in our community. It feels very difficult, I think, to consider providing a raise for someone else when, you know, many of ourselves are struggling economically and financially right now. And so I think that's the biggest challenge, and it's something that, you know, we have to work through and make sure that we're addressing. But another one is the politicization, right? Some people might have challenges with their own respective council members. Some folks might feel like they don't feel adequately represented by the existing council. And the commission as a whole voted to enact these raises in a 2-year increment so that we could basically say to all of the folks that have questions around, well, who is going to benefit from this raise? Specifically, we can say, you know, the incoming city council and the next person that wants to raise their hand and serve their community are going to have the opportunity to benefit here. So those are some of the biggest challenges that we run into in some of our responses to that.
Well, I want to thank you for your public service, you and the committee members, Alfredo Araiza, Patrick Burns, Gregory Facey, Kelly Griffith, Claire Knipe, and Joy Noriega. Thank you from this citizen journalist for your service to our community. Does anyone else here have any questions for Ms. Dent? Oh, see how powerfully persuasive you are? You've left us stunned and speechless with your highly persuasive arguments, which I'm sure our editorial page editor, Sarah Gasson, and editor, Abreza just added by agreeing to raises attached with a, I have no clue what she is in this chat. I'm sorry, it's just acronyms that confuse me.
Can I speak? Hello?
Yes, please do. That would be very helpful.
Well,
Hi,
I didn't want Ms. Dent to go off before I asked this question, and I was typing it, so I just sent it without finishing it. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
So by agreeing to 410, we're agreeing to raises for mayor and council. Not a problem with that. What I have a problem with is they're writing in automatic raises every single year using the CPI, which could be 3%. And that's where I have an issue with. But I worked for the U of A for over 30 years, and we didn't get that. However, we did get merit raise, but a merit raise, you actually had to fill out the proper paperwork and go in for and speak to your supervisor. They don't have to do anything. All they have to do is say, "Ooh, okay, automatic raise every year, boom, boom, boom." And the more you make doing this type of calculation on the CPI, the more raise you get. So the U of A stopped doing that, and it's across the board raise where everybody gets $200 a year or $500 extra a year. This is, I think, it's not fair as far as, in my mind, as far as, it's just not fair. Anyway, thank you.
Your response, Ms. Dent? Thanks for the question, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Abreza. I hear that completely. And I mean, just for reference, the Arizona minimum wage increased 15 cents in relation to this.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out, Laura. Could you repeat that?
Sure. Can you hear me all right now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I thanked Abriza for her question and her comment, and just wanted to reference that according to the state minimum wage that also mirrors the same index that voters have supported, wages went up 15 cents last year. So we're not going to see these kind of runaway wage increases via the CPI. It's really just a baseline so that there is some sort of increase in between these very long stretches where we're having a hard time making sure that public leaders are compensated. So I hear that and I understand the concern. I think this is a pretty modest increase. And starting from a pretty low place, like $24,000 a year, those increases are going to reflect that original compensation. So we actually were quite torn on the commission and wanting to do a bit more, but also wanted to tread a middle path to make sure that we were connecting with and appealing to folks across the spectrum.
Thank
Laura,
you.
is it, I'm sorry, David.
Right
Laura,
ahead.
is it the same CPI that Social Security uses?
Yes, it is the same metric that is used across the nation to account for inflation. There are different sorts of metrics that we considered. We were thinking about the regional median income. We were thinking about the regional inflation, which is a metric that is used in economic sectors. And we felt like we wanted to mirror what voters endorsed in 2016 and what we see used to calculate national social benefits and things of that nature. So it's all the same kind of metric that we're endorsing.
So it's in the 2% range. It historically is what it's averaging.
Typically, yes, it's quite modest.
Pamela Aronson in the chat has a question. What is the plan to pay for these increases?
Yes, that is a great question. So we asked our team within the city to calculate approximately how much this increase would cost per individual, and the cost to Tucson citizens would be approximately 15 cents per year. So it's a relatively modest request. There's only 7 individuals that are impacted, as we have 6 members of the council and 1 mayor. And so we are thinking that this is a pretty small request that can be easily accommodated in terms of compensating mayor and council a little bit better.
Well, as we are bringing this interview meeting to a close, I'm wondering if you have any closing arguments you would like to make, Ms. Dent.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. I'm a born and raised Arizonan. I have, lived across the state. I grew up in the city of Phoenix, have spent much of my life, nearly the past 20 years in the city of Tucson. And I care a lot about our state and the future of our state. And just, it was a real learning experience for me being part of this commission. And I want to thank my fellow commissioners, but just looking at how our other communities are investing in public leaders around what are the structural barriers to getting more folks that are, women, people of color, working families, working individuals. It just really opened my eyes to see what other communities are doing to invest in themselves, what we can be doing to invest in ourselves. And this is one very small step. That there's much more work to do to knock down some of the structural barriers that have kept a lot of folks out of service for a long time. Many of you will note that our current mayor is the first woman to serve in this role. And, these aren't accidents that occur. These are really structural challenges that we have to grapple with. So this is one small step that we can all take as Tucsonans to open the door just a little bit more. There's a lot of work to do, but I certainly hope that.
Well, once again, thank you for your time, Ms. Dent, and thank you for your public service. Sarah Brown, I have one final question. That is, do we have a sense of when our endorsements will be published? And please unmute yourself, young woman.
Of course, you got me on that. I believe that Sarah's goal was to have those in print on the 3rd. But please don't completely quote me on that, but it was very soon in October.
Okay. Well, thank you, Sarah. And thanks to everybody for participating and listening and being good citizens. You're all much appreciated. It's Dave Fitzsimmons, Arizona Daily Star, wishing you a terrific week. We'll see you all later.